testament to the growth and vibrancy of the Africa Oxford Initiative community. So a big welcome. And for those who are new, who in the first Insaka or the UA first Insaka, our Insakas are generally a gathering where we have discussions around Africa-focused research. We have deep, meaningful discussions, but most importantly, get to network, make new friends, and also just expand the community. Now, at our last Insaka, I think we set the bar really high. We had about 4 speakers. That was a shift from 2 speakers. And I think today we intend to keep that momentum as well. We have lined up 4 distinguished speakers who are also part of the AfOx Fellow, the 2024-2025 cohorts. I don't know if they're in the room, they can just wave so that we appreciate them. Yeah? Also, welcome to Oxford. And in the true Insaka fashion, our Insakas and our presentations are normally on various topics that are normally diverse. And I think this evening we'll have the same. Our speakers will give us very insightful talks, right from maternal mental health. This one I'm looking forward to, galaxy formation. We will have a talk on forced migration. We'll also have one on extractive industries. But before we dive into the main business, I'll briefly talk about what the Africa Oxford Initiative does for those of us who are just hearing about us now. So the Africa Oxford Initiative is basically a platform that brings together all of Africa's engagement within the University of Oxford. We work across divisions and across the collegiate universities. And basically, it's around this idea of making Africa a strategic priority for the university moving forward. And do this through a number of initiatives, one of them being our gathering here, the Insaka. But I would generally say 3 big programs, that is education, research, and innovation. So through our education program, we basically provide outstanding scholars with scholarships to come into the university for about a year to pursue their master's degree. And then through the research program, through which our fellows in the room are actually partaking, we facilitate that equitable collaboration between researchers based at the University of Oxford and their peers based at the continent. And they do get to spend at least 2 months at the University of Oxford as part of this fellowship. Then through the 3rd big program, where we basically have the AfOx Innovations Program. Here we essentially help translate research into action. So we help innovators in the continent develop some of the biggest innovations to solve Africa's challenges. So in a nutshell, if there's one thing that you come out with from this Insaka about what we do is we are the go-to place for all things Africa at Oxford. So in terms of research program, we focus on 4 main big, I call them big thematic areas. These address developmental challenges back in the continent. So right from green futures, innovations and prosperity, healthy people, integrated societies, and we intentionally keep them broad so that any of our researchers working in these areas can be able to collaborate with the Africa Oxford Initiative around a particular area of research. A special mention, given we have fellows in the room, of our visiting fellowship. That's the AfOx Visiting Fellowship Program. So these are basically designed for African researchers based in African institutions to come over to basically partner with a researcher at Oxford for about a period of a year. And within that period of a year, they get to come over to Oxford for about 2 months. That's between May and June, hence the fellows in the room. And they basically are associated closely with the collaborator here and tied to a particular department, whether they get a range of benefits around a particular area of research and area of work. So we've done quite, I must say, quite a bit of this for the last couple of years. And I think we've had a range of fellowships and disciplines, as you can see displayed there, right from health and medicine all the way to archaeological research. And I must say that the call for the next cohort is actually open, and we really call on you to share this within your network so that we have the next researchers come on board to benefit from this very innovative and impactful program. As I conclude, I would like us to, as a community, help get the information out there. So we do have the AfOx mailing list. I would kindly request that we sign up and receive information about what we do and share that within our networks. We also have our social media platforms. If you're able to have us connect with you on LinkedIn, on X, on Facebook, please help us amplify our message so that we're able to grow and amplify not just our community, but also the work that we do. Without further ado, I think you did not come here to listen to me. I'd like to shift to the main event here, which is really about our speakers. I'd like to introduce the first speaker. This is going to be Dr. Sarah Mlambo. So Sarah is a lecturer at the School of Nursing at Helvetia University. I hope I pronounced that correctly. In Namibia, and a visiting fellow of the Africa Oxford Initiative here at Oxford. So she's currently collaborating with Dr. Nicole Votruba at the Nuffield Department of Women's and Reproductive Health. Dr. Mlambo's work centers on maternal mental health, indigenous knowledge systems, and woman-centered care. With a PhD in nursing, she has advanced midwifery practices in Namibia and is widely published in the field of maternal health. She serves on Namibia's National Maternal and Neonatal Death and Review Committee and is actively involved in community and professional health networks. As an AfOx Fellow, Dr. Mlambo is leading a project exploring how traditional practices in Zambia, Zimbabwe, and India influence maternal mental health, with the aim of integrating indigenous knowledge into modern healthcare systems. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Sarah Mlambo to take us through our presentation.
Thank you very much, David. A very good evening to you all. My topic is on indigenous and decolonial approaches in maternal mental health. The aim of this talk is just to echo and amplify the importance of social structures, indigenous practices, alternative medicine, and alternative approaches in ensuring that women have good mental well-being. And we know that women are a bedrock of our societies, especially in Africa, but I think it is also the same in any other part of the world. My mother told me is a very personal and a very specific talk when we are talking about mothers. They are the foundation. They command respect, and they are the ones that give us stability within our homes. They are a source of authority. They care for the children and they nurture them. That's the importance of them having a good mental well-being in or during their lifetime. They are storytellers, and when they are storytellers, they pass on knowledge from generation to generation. And with them rearing and with them being the core subject within the household, they create what we call hunu in Shona, which means being humane, being a human. And this brings about also the aspect of Ubuntu. I am because you are. And women are not in isolation. They are social beings and they need to interact with the community to ensure that everything within the community and in the homes is fine. As a midwife, pregnancy is physiological. There is no pathology in most of the women that we are taking care of. However, we have stresses that come with pregnancy. And if they are not attended to, we shall have issues with maternal mental health. And this is what we want to avert by drawing from indigenous knowledge system, indigenous practices, cultural formations or cultural frameworks that ensure we have social justice, we have equity, and we also need to bring about social security as well as health security. When a woman falls pregnant, it's a cause for celebration. In my culture, we say makoro koto, but the response is what is very important. We say ndedutese, because ndedutese means it's for all of us. It shows a sign, or it shows the community is responsible for this pregnant woman. And when a woman is giving birth, we say asununguka or abetera, she has been helped. It shows community involvement in all this. And with the community with her, it also helps her to have mental stability, good mental health in. However, when this socialization or this social network is absent, we tend to have overthinking, and we call it kufungisisa or kufunganya. This is a term which just draws us to the fact that with all stresses, a woman is carrying a lot within the African context. She is the mother, she is there to nurture the children, as earlier on alluded. However, if she has a support system, this kufungisisa will not come into play. The statistics tell us 1 in 5 women is exposed to postnatal depression. Prevention is usually better than cure. And when we are taking maternal mental health, indigenous practices, that is equitable and that is reached by the society, we are going to ensure that we avert some of these problems. 70% of maternal mortalities are happening in sub-Saharan Africa, where we do have a vast knowledge of indigenous practices, which integrated into our conventional medicine can give us a big turnaround. Perinatal mental health from pregnancy, childbirth, as well as postpartum is very important, and the World Health Organization is alluding to that and echoing the importance of us finding ways of ensuring a good mental health status of women. So, where did the rain begin to beat us? As Chinua Achebe once said, and there is definitely a danger of a single story by Adichie. When we look at society and do not acknowledge one another, we fall to the danger of a single story. We have communities that have been in existence. Pregnancies have always been in existence. How have they coped with ensuring good mental health? So we need to be able to articulate and look into these approaches so that we can borrow what is safe to ensure good mental well-being. Urbanization and globalization are no exception. We are all in different spaces at different times in looking for work and looking for livelihood. The sense of community has now been displaced. How can we, as a society, how can we create a context-specific society to ensure that all our women, whether they are displaced, whether they're in Europe or they are still in Africa, they still maintain to have good mental well-being? So why should we decolonize? Why should we look for alternative approaches? Alternative approaches are there to ensure that everybody is involved. We have social justice, we have equity, and we can also have inclusivity for everybody who is involved. Accessibility, we know that in most parts of Africa, accessibility to healthcare centers is very difficult. How can we improve the livelihood of women, taking into cognizance the burden that they carry and the burden that is put upon them when they also fall pregnant with things like morning sickness, fatigue, and this is a woman who still needs to sustain the family. So we need to make sure that the healthcare system is context specific. What works a one-size-fits-all is not going to work to improve maternal mental health. So what are the alternative approaches that I'm going to talk about? We have the Masungiro aspect, which is very dominant in the Shona culture. And looking and borrowing from other African countries, we realize the term could be more Zimbabwean. However, the way it is done, it is more in the region. A woman, when she is pregnant, she's sent back to her family when she's around 6 months. This gives her a sense of belonging, and there they give her the help that she requires. They remove the burden of her overthinking. They remove the burden of her having any other duties, but to just care for her. This shows the awareness that has always been available within the cultural aspects or within our people. And during this time, there is masuo that is done, which is equivalent to perineal massage, but they use different aspects like the Christmas tree that you see. We call it the Christmas tree. I know it's very different from the one here, but we call it the Christmas tree or Moparazamakore. This is a tree whose roots are used for a woman from 6 months when she is pregnant to help her to prevent perineal trauma. And we know that perineal trauma is one of the indicators or one of the issues that causes women to have postnatal depression or postpartum mental health issues. When a woman does not have trauma, we know that she is happy to have her baby. The anxieties are reduced, and then she can also find a way of coming into motherhood with help from those around her. With all this being said, the important thing of traditional, indigenous, alternative is just for us to integrate, to meet each other halfway, ensuring context-specific. I echo that once again, because what works in a different place cannot work for the other person. And with globalization, with urbanization, we all need to ensure that we identify some of these alternative approaches. We need to be able to make sure that women are safe and make sure that their mental well-being is par excellence. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mlambo, on that presentation. Really powerful on the need to decolonize maternal mental health. If you have any questions, I kindly request that you park those, write them down. We will have a Q&A session right after the presentations. This moment, I'd like to call the second speaker, Dr. Marie Kosaga. Dr. Marie Kosaga is an assistant professor of physics at the University of Joseph Kizebo. That's in Burkina Faso, and a visiting fellow with the Africa Oxford Initiative at the University of Oxford. She's currently based at the sub-department of astrophysics, working under the mentorship of Professor Martin Bureau. Dr. Kosaga holds a PhD in astronomy and astrophysics from Marseille University, I hope I pronounced that right, and the University of Cape Town. Her research explores galaxy formation and dark matter, using both advanced telescope data and hydrodynamical solutions to study how galaxies evolve. She is widely recognized for her work, including receiving an African Women in Astronomy Early Career Award. And as an AfOx Fellow, she is leading a project that uses data from the MECAT and ALMA telescopes to examine mass distributions in spiral galaxies, deepening our understanding of the dark matter's role in shaping the universe. Dr. Kosaga also co-founded La Astronomie Afrique, the first Francophone astronomy magazine amplifying African voices in space science. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Marie Kosaga to give a presentation.
Good afternoon. Who among you has already heard of dark matter? Great. I see a lot of hand raised. So I'm going to talk about dark matter distribution in galaxies. So it is known that the universe is composed of only 5% of baryonic matter. Only 5% of baryonic matter. That is matter made of baryons, which is made of protons, electrons, neutrons, including stars, galaxies, you, me, and everything else we can observe with the naked eye or through telescopes. So the remaining 95% is constituted of unseen matter and distributed as follows. About 25, I don't know if you can hear me well, yes. About 25% of dark matter and 70% of dark energy. So dark matter is used to explain how galaxies stay close together, while dark energy is responsible for the accelerated expansion of the universe over time. So we cannot claim, as astronomers, we cannot claim to understand our universe if we only know about 5% of its constituent, right? So to understand the formation and the evolution of the universe, we need to understand the properties of dark matter and dark energy. So in this talk, I'm going to focus on dark matter as it's my area of research. So why is it called dark matter? It's because we don't know much about this matter. No particle of dark matter has ever been detected so far with our instruments. Strange, right? Because dark matter does not interact with ordinary matter except through its gravitational influence. So, however, several experimental methods has been used to describe the presence of dark matter and allow us to study its properties. So I'm going to focus on one of the methods that's called the mass modeling method, which allow us to determine the distribution of dark matter from in galaxies from the rotation curve and the distribution of the visible matter that we can detect that's come from baryons. So here I'm showing a rotation curve of a galaxy, because when we observe a galaxy, we have information on how gas and star rotate inside the galaxy. That means from the center to the outer part of the galaxy. And here I'm showing the rotation curve. You have the velocity as a function of the distance from the center of the galaxy, that means the radius. And the orange curve is the curve that we observe. So the observed rotation curve is the orange, and the rotation curve expected from the visible matter, that means the baryons, is shown here in blue curve. So you can see that there is a discrepancy between the observed rotation curve and the expected one. So to recover the observed rotation curve, we need to include something, right? And it's invisible. So we need to include dark matter. And this is what we do using different profiles in order to model the rotation curve of galaxies. And how do we do that? So to construct the mass model of the galaxies, that means the mass distribution, we combine kinematical data and photometric data. So for the kinematical data, we use H1 observation, as it allows us to get the gas, to detect the gas in the galaxy, and also to go further away from the center of the galaxy, where dark matter is more dominant. So here you can see the H1, the detection, the map of around the galaxy, because the H1 observation allow us to trace the rotational velocity of the atomic gas in galaxies using radio telescope. And here an example of the telescopes. We have the VLA in United States. You have also the Western Box telescope that we can use to collect the signal of the galaxy. And we have the velocity map. This velocity map shows us how the galaxy rotates. So we have different colors. So the red one shows when the part of the galaxy moving from us, like away from us, and the blue one is when the galaxy coming toward us, like the part that is close to us. And we have, from that, we have the rotation curve. And for the photometric data allow us to determine the mass distribution of the baryonic component. And we can use like optical data or infrared data. And this is the mass distribution. I'm not going to like explain more, maybe questions if you have. And now that we have the observational, the H1 rotation curve and the photometric data, that means the distribution of the visible matter, we can construct the mass model. We can model the rotation curve by assuming we have different profile, but we assume that the dark matter halo is distributed as a constant in the central part. Like we have a constant central density profile for the dark matter. And here we have the different contribution, the gas contribution in blue, the star contribution in yellow, the dark matter contribution in magenta. And if we sum those components, we made the quadratic sum of the different components, we can now recover the observed rotation curve, which is in blue line. This is the model, and the black dots represent the observed rotation curve of the galaxy. So now that we have the dark matter component, we can now investigate the scaling relation, that means the relationship between the visible matter and the dark matter halo. So for this, different model, different method, scaling relation has been studied on the relationship between the stellar component, the stellar mass, and the halo mass. And less attention has been paid to the relationship between the atomic gas and the halo mass, even though we know that atomic gas is considered the reservoir from which star form, because it's collapsed and then it can form star, and then stars are inside galaxies. Yes. So here I'm showing the ratio between the H1 mass, that means the atomic gas mass, and the dark matter halo as a function of the stellar mass of the galaxy. And we found that the ratio remained constant and independent on the mass of the galaxy. But when we compare with previous studies and also with numerical simulations, we can find a discrepancy between our finding and what they found, because they found that the ratio decreased for high mass galaxies. That means when you look at here, it's decreasing, right? You can see that the red band, it's decreasing. Mm-hmm. So yes, so we here we conclude that there is a self-regulatory mechanism, mass-independent mechanism that we need to further explore in order to understand the relationship between the atomic gas and the H1 gas and the dark matter halo gas. And the next step is to explore this relation and to distant galaxies, because previous studies, our studies were more focused on nearby galaxies, that means local galaxies, and now we want to extend it onto distant galaxies in order to really have more statistical, like what, to more see the relationship between the different components to, in order to see the influence of the parameters on the scaling relation between the dark matter and the atomic gas. And we are planning to use the observation, H1 observation from the Meerkat survey. So Meerkat is located in South Africa, and it is one of the major precursor of the square kilometer array. So it's the square kilometer array will be the biggest telescope, radio telescope in the world, and it's a project that regroup many countries, include the UK. So it's going to give us more information about the formation and evolution of the galaxy, because I mentioned that we want to explore the scaling relation on distant galaxy in order to better understand the discrepancy, better understand the discrepancy between our finding and the previous studies. And why distant galaxies? Because distant galaxies also is good, because in astronomy, when you observe a distant object, it's like going back in time when the universe was more younger. And so this can help us to understand how the universe formed and how it's evolved also. And this is the next step. That means explore the scaling relation and really understand the impact of dark matter in galaxies. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that presentation, Dr. Marie. I think many will relate. I always used to see galaxies in movies, dark matter and Star Trek and the rest, but today at least you've broken it down, really bringing meaning to galaxies, dark matter, and how those two relate. So I will say again, if you have any questions, please, I encourage you to put those down. We will have a Q&A session as the session ends. For those who are online, please type up your questions as well. We should be able to read those out loud at the session ends. I think at this stage, I'd like to introduce our third speaker for the evening, Dr. Fekadu Aguna Tufa. Dr. Fekadu is an associate professor of social anthropology at Addis Ababa University, Ethiopia. He has held several leadership roles at the university, including head of the Department of Social Anthropology, and is currently a visiting fellow at the University of Oxford through the Africa Oxford Initiative, working with Dr. Jin Ho Chung at the Transport Studies Unit. Dr. Tufa is a leading scholar on forced displacement, migration, and conflict in the Horn of Africa. His research has shaped major international projects, including studies on Eritrea and Somali refugees under the EU GCRF frameworks. With a PhD from Martin Luther University, his work highlights how mobility, identity, and social networks intersect in contexts of displacement. At Oxford, he's exploring the links between climate change, conflict, and protracted displacement in Ethiopia's Somali region, with the aim of informing policy on resilience and sustainable development. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Fekadu Aguna.
Good afternoon. Thank you, AfOx guys, for having me here. My today's presentation is, it's difficult to talk about displacement after after galaxy formation. My talk is, this brief talk is on protracted displacement and the livelihood in the Somali region of Ethiopia. I don't describe livelihood as such. I've been doing that. Oxford Refugee Studies Center has done a lot on that. But today I would like to somewhat question our work so far. What I'm going to talk is about displacement that has been categorized as refugees, internally displaced peoples or IDPs, returnees, deportees, host communities in Ethiopia with a focus on the Somali region. My argument for today is in the context of protracted and multiple intractable crises, such as conflict, climate change or drought, floods, and a combination of all of this. As the people on the ground mostly live on local solidarities based on sociocultural commonalities and experiences of vulnerabilities. In this situation, I started to think, I've been doing field work the last 4 or 5 years in the region. And other than what I'm doing, I started to observe how the people live, and I started to question these categorizations. So I say these categorizations, or the categories I just mentioned, are quite fluid, and they might not be helpful both academically as well as in terms of interventions by humanitarian development organizations. So let me give you, description of what I observed, but then I conclude with my argument. The Horn of Africa is facing what I call a crisis of displacement, especially in the last 4, 5, 6 years. Currently, there are over 20 million IDPs and over 5.8 or 5.6 million refugees. A good example, Sudan is hosting 9.1 million IDPs. Ethiopia has been hosting, 2 years ago during the Tigray war, Ethiopia had 5.8 million IDPs, now reduced to 4.5 or probably below that. Somalia 3.8 million, South Sudan 2.3, but the conflict going on now, probably the number has increased. On the other hand, the region is also hosting big number of refugees, not only IDPs, but also refugees. Uganda is the biggest refugee hosting country in the continent with 1.6 million. Ethiopia claimed to be number 1, proud of that, 1.1 million. Sudan now, regardless of the crisis, Sudan is still hosting, around 900 million. Kenya, 900,000. Kenya, 860,000. South Sudan, it goes on. Then let me zoom into Ethiopia. In the last 6, 7 years, again, Ethiopia has faced unprecedented level of violent crisis, violent conflicts and displacement. With, as I mentioned, 4.5 million IDPs this time, over 800,000 deportees, almost all of them from Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and 1.1 million refugees, as this is a map of refugees. Countries are very proud of hosting refugees, but they undermine their IDPs, as you may guess. So within this, there are also annually huge number of people leave the country irregularly. Some data try to estimate that around 500,000 people leave the country irregularly through different directions, to the Middle East, through Libya, to South Africa as well. And amid this all development, Ethiopian government is proud of telling on the media that the government has processed official I call it something export of, 350,000 labor migrants, mainly again to the Middle East, from where most of them have been deported. Then zooming into the Somali region, about which I'm going to talk, let me give you, a small historical context to what's going on in the Somali region. If you are students of history, in 1977-78, there was Ethiopia-Somalia war. With that war, some people call it Ogaden wars. With that war, about close to 1 million Ethiopians, mainly of Somali ethnic groups, fled to Somalia. So the east of the map is Somalia. Then in 1990, the Zadibari government in Somalia collapsed, and the millions fled back to Ethiopia, or including Somali citizens fled to Ethiopia and Kenya. That time, those red triangles are one of the refugee clusters we have. Some of them were established in 1990. Now refugees, some of them who have come to Ethiopia in 1990 are still in the campus. In 1990, there was Hartishek refugee camp on the Somaliland-Ethiopia border. It had 400,000 refugees, and it was the biggest refugee camp in the world. Then in 2008, it was the time Al-Shabaab was established in South Central Ethiopia. Then over 200,000 Somalis fled to Ethiopia. Then the southern one, we call it the Dolo Ado cluster. The 5 refugee camps were established after 2008. Of course, some of them ran from drought, but for a reason I'm going to mention, they all registered that they fled the country because of conflict. But there was another conflict 2 years ago in 2023 over Lasanod between Somaliland and Somalia. Then, around 100,000 ran. This is the eastern tip. Another cluster of refugees were established. But beside this, all refugees, due to internal conflict between Somali and Oromo, between Somali and Afar, there are also internal displacement due to conflict, but also climate change that I'm going to mention. As a result, this region is now hosting 360,000 registered refugees and over 1.2 million registered IDPs. Then drought is a recurrent problem in the region, but this time, the time it stay extended for years. The last drought was between 2021 and 2023 when I was doing field work in Somali region, and millions of livestock were perished, about 1.4 million in Somali region and about 2.3 million in neighboring Oromia. Then 1.1 million people were registered as IDPs. And as if this is not enough, flood also started an emerging problem. Drought ended temporarily in April 2023. Then in May, flood started, just next month. Then, however, the difference between displacement by climate change and displacement by conflict is that displacement by climate change does not count for refugee status. Therefore, when people flee from Somalia, they register as conflict-induced displacement because UNHCR does not accept their registration as refugees. Even internally, Ethiopian government say no, climate change or drought is a temporary problem, so that you will go home very soon. Thus, they are not taken serious. Then, but on the other hand, these all problems cause loss of asset and cause food insecurity. Many people have lost all their assets, as I tried to mention. This is a relief map that the relief organizations use. Different colors represent different level of the crisis. The blue is relatively minimal problem. Yellow is like stress, and the light brown is crisis, which means Somali region, almost the whole Somali region is in a situation of crisis. And this deep brown or red is FEMI, I mean, is emergency, which is mainly in northern Ethiopia due to the Tigray war. So in other words, is what I'm trying to say with this is that even those who have not been displaced physically have been displaced from their livelihood, or immobility does not mean that people have a better life. Just, you see, I mean, as the number shows, according to these relief organizations, in 2024, about 3 million people in Somali region are in need of immediate food aid. Then let me say, and let me read these two quotes from my field work, which shows, you see, what does this mean when we think of the people. I'm talking about the fluidity of this categorization. The first one is about a guy called Kada, who is a shop owner in Kabrabaya refugee camp. This man, as a young boy, he was displaced in 1977 and fled to Somalia. In Somalia, he joined his uncles instead of going to refugee camps. Then in 1990, when Somalia state collapsed, he fled back to Ethiopia. But this time when he fled back into Ethiopia, he joined a refugee camp in Ethiopia. Technically, he was a returnee, but he ended up in refugee camp. Then recently, during the Lasanod conflict in 2023, see, some of his relatives from Somalia came and joined him. Instead of going to refugee camp, they came and joined him. Then the other one, the other call, it's about a certain guy called Abdi. You see, Abdi came to Kabrabaya, 17 years ago, after all his livestock, perished due to a drought. So he's from Ethiopia, but he came to refugee camp and joined the refugee camp where he had uncles, as he usually said. See, in the camp, his wife gave birth to 8 children, and yet, see, they didn't get a refugee status. See, but his kids get access to services within the camp. With this, what I'm saying is, see, being in a refugee camp does not mean you are a proper refugee, or being outside the camp does not mean you are living a proper life. With this, I conclude, in the context of protracted, multiple and complex crises such as in Somali region, survival and development is shaped by complex interactions between refugees, returnees, deportees, IDPs, hosts, who are with several experiences. Most of the hosts were refugees in Somalia, now came back and they became hosts. And the diaspora, who were also in some of these refugee camps. Most of Somali diaspora were from these refugee camps. And of course, the humanitarian organizations and the development actors are important. In this situation, being a host does not mean necessarily, they are better than refugees. Rather, many of the hosts, I said these are returnees, deportees, IDPs, are people who lost their livelihood. Sometimes, it's run to refugee camp for survival. Therefore, academic engagements and humanitarian development interventions should take this complex whole into considerations by focusing on area-based approach, where people are treated based on their vulnerability rather than their status. This will help the social cohesion as well as to locally and sustainably integrate people who are in a protracted displacement without any clue when this displacement will end. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fekadi, for that presentation and just giving us a fresh lens on how complicated the issue of refugee displacement is, and it's not straightforward as most of our developmental agencies or initiatives make it look. Thank you for that. We're doing well on time. We are moving on to our last presentation of the evening, made by Dr. Mustafa Abdelal. Dr. Mustafa is an assistant professor of African history at Cairo University, where he specializes in economic history. He also coordinates the economic history working group at the Young Scholars Initiative. Currently, he is a visiting fellow at AfOx, based at the African Studies Center, working with Dr. David Damtar. Dr. Abdelal's research explores the socio-economic impact of extractive industries with a focus on the precarity of mining communities in Zambia's Copperbelt region. His PhD at the University of Cambridge examined industrial development and the state resource use in Zambia. He's also managing editor of Ifriqiat. I hope I pronounced that correctly, yeah? And an academic series on African history and society. At Oxford, Dr. Abdelal is advancing a project that investigates the historical links between extractive industries and industrial diversification in Zambia, offering insights for sustainable development in resource-rich regions. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Mustafa Abdelal.
Thank you, my director. Oh, yes. Well, thank you indeed. It's my pleasure to be here. Thank you, David. Thank you for AfOx team in Insaka for organizing this. I devoted 2 minutes out of 10 minutes of the slides to speak about, which is peculiar a little bit, about why North Africa scholars decided to study Central Africa. And when I started doing research during my MPhil in Congo and my PhD in Central Africa, I often have been told that I'm trying to sell coal in Newcastle, which is something difficult to do. And I audited 1 course of African history. Thankfully, it's not in UK, but in a European institution. And the professor told me, Mustafa, Egypt is not an African country. It's a Middle Eastern country. I couldn't debate too much with him. I just told him that despite the fact that Ghana, Zimbabwe, Football National Cup disqualified us from the World Cup, we won the African National Cup 7 times, 3 of them back to back. And the issue I've realized that all the African Studies Center in North and South, we still studying local regional contexts. We are not studying each other very well. It's very peculiar to see someone from Ghana study history of Libya or Algeria, or don't study vice versa. So the issue of bridging the divide is very important. And it will, of course, relieve and fix a lot of amounting misunderstandings between different regions in Africa from transnational and global context. That's why I started to travel to Zambia, Zimbabwe, Congo, South Africa to conduct archival research. And basically here in UK, especially here in Oxford, as a Guggenheim Archives, I spent a lot of time reading the archives here at Guggenheim Library. So, speaking about the significance of the extractive industries and linking these questions to the current challenges we are facing, it actually offers a very critical perspective to decode the present and navigate the future, especially in the questions of green resources scramble, the colonial legacies over which shape modern extraction and counter extraction, the resource curves, the changing conceptions of resource nationalization, which have been seen now in South Africa, and the economic sovereignty, which has been discussing very often. And of course, recently, the decarbonization and environmental justice. And this is how we can see the extractive industries linkages, because there was a big question among economic historians of why Asian countries managed to industrialize while Africa did not, even though both continents have experienced colonial legacies. And from the perspective of historians, writings from Garth Austin, David Frankema, Martin Irving, they have argued that Africa has been for a long time shortage in labor and land abundance, and the changing ratios of factor of productions play a significant role in determining the capital-intensive industries path for African continent. contrary to Asian countries which experience a labor-intensive industries. This is one of the main answers we can address from these big questions. So here, the question of the economies in Central and Southern Africa basically follows the capital-intensive industries. So I've tried to understand the linkages between the mining industry and the other sectors from the Hirschman theory, and also try to understand how the people there, whether they were settlers, whether they were African mine workers, or African societies who replaced, or elites Africa who replaced the settler society post-colonial, understand the mono-commodity concepts. So, of course, political history is different from economic history. So we follow the categorization of economic history, as you can see here. In 1924, 1939, Zambia, as a surrounding country by two growing economies in Southern Rhodesia, South Africa, they have often seen the copper belt and North Rhodesia as a growing market to export their surpluses. So they literally handicap any attempt of establishing industry there, even though there was a big need to establish, for instance, even copper-related industries like explosives, sulfate, and other related industries to copper industry. From 1939 to 1953, the growing, but not comparable to the settlers population in South Rhodesia and South Africa, of course, but the growing communities there, they started to realize how significant to have our own industries, because the curse or the uncertainty of copper industry. Then Zambia was spectacularly unlucky when they entered the Central Africa Federation with South Rhodesia and Malawi. Then it turned to have two stages in post-colonial period, which I argue that during the first 4 years, there were very promising chances to put Zambia in a very diverse resource-based and industrial diversification. But after the flawed nationalization, especially Zambianization policy, Zambia did not achieve, and they abandoned their comparative advantage. And here we can see that this is an image of the mining space in Kitwe and Mufulira in 1930s, how complex this area was. And there was the first non-Western, Zambia was the first non-Western country to establish copper refineries in 1930s. And there was a big contentions between colonial office and the industrialists who lived there. And they realized that according to the location theory of industries, it's much better to establish refineries close to the raw materials than establishing it in Liverpool. In the reluctant transformation from the archives of Bodleian Library here, Roy Welensky, who was the second prime minister of the Central African Federation, he was a very active in the debates of having our own industries for settler communities in Northern Rhodesia. And he started to criticize the way they import a lot of goods and manufactured goods from Southern Rhodesia and South Africa. And as we can see here, they were aware of the uncertainty and precariousness of depending only on mono commodity. And this also could be traced from the mine workers, because you used to secure their works in the villages if something happened, to be aware that we might return back to work in our villages. This kind of uncertainty and precariousness emerged not only in post-colonial, but in 1930s. And there were, however, some copper-related industries, a small size due to the tariff policies between North Rhodesia, South Rhodesia, and South Africa, but somehow took place due to the necessity of lowering the cost of production. In Central Africa Federation, it was very problematic because they looked at Zambia as a space for extraction only, and they looked to South Rhodesia as a base for advanced industrial base. So they hurdled any serious or any industrial plan to take place in this time. And from this cartoon from the British Library archives, you can see that the southern man who is sitting in the chair, Southern Rhodesia, and milking the North Rhodesia's resources, rich resources, and the Federal Party handicapped them from moving forward. and the colonial office can do nothing. And this is the story of the colonial, but the post-colonial, Zambia has a very wonderful opportunity since 1964 to 1968. Somehow they understood the opportunities of import substitution industrialization, and they started to establish a wide range industries and they expanded factories. However, Kenneth Kaunda thought for a while, especially he mentioned this in his humanist. He mentioned that the process of Zambianization is not only Africanization. Zambianization meaning that all the non-Zambian are not much welcome to continue working or staying in Zambia. This led to migration not only of Europeans, Indians, but also skilled labor of Malawians and Congolese. And the Zambianization process, which led to the nationalization of the sector, they realized that they will establish an added value for copper fabrication, which is very difficult to be established because they abandoned the comparative advantage from expanding the copper production, and they went to a very competitive sector which they don't have or lack the sufficient technologies to run it by themselves. I skipped because these are all of the industries they have to manage to expand it, especially between 1964 and 1968. However, there were new estimates that Zambia did achieve a considerable amount of manufacturing compared to other surrounding territories. This is contrary to what has been told that Zambia was less than the other surrounding colonies or countries. For the conclusion, it's always debatable that imperial interest was the main factor in determining or shaping the industrial policy. However, other economic imperative, like the location of refineries, I have referred to. Zambia's position in manufacturing output from a historical perspective should be considered as the opportunity of creating linkages and industrial diversification as well. The local industry and the size of the market, they always argue that they didn't manufacture because they have a small size of market, which is contrary because South Africa and Southern Rhodesia get the tariff policies to export their products. For the current time, the UN IDB, Program for Development in United Nations, they're always advertising for the Africa is valid for the services-led growth model, which is actually, I argue that Africa still have the opportunity to industrial-led growth, especially now we are labor abundance and we can transfer skills to African nations, African peoples, especially the opportunity of the majority of the population in Africa, more than 50-60% are young African people. So I will stop it here, leave it here, and I'm looking for questions. Thank you for the time.
Another round of applause for last. And really ending on a good note. We have all the resources in Africa, but why is it that we are not developing, processing them within the continent? Why is it that we're only extracting them and taking them out there? So I really look forward to the next session, which is a Q&A. At this moment, I'd like to invite all our speakers to join me at the front. There is a roving mic somewhere at the back here. And we have about 20 or so minutes. I'll kindly request that we take a first round of questions. Please, if our presenters could come to the front. I'll give them another round of applause. I appreciate them. We have one there. Great. We have second, third, and then Vuyo fourth, yeah? We can take the first round of 4, then we can take the next round, yeah? Please.
Good afternoon or good evening, everybody. I'm Josephine. I'm one of the fellows for 2024 and 2025. My question is for Dr. Salam Lambo. And my question is in relation to the work that you're doing for mental health. I just want to know what are the current practices in regards to the problems you identified, and what are you proposing as a solution, maybe a more decolonized solution or more Afrocentric kind of a solution? Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Rachel Titus, one of the current AfOx fellows. My question or comment says also to Dr. Sarah Lambert. The issues of alternatives to handling mental health of women, what should we do? And at what level? Should we focus on the men whom we are married to, who don't understand that when you're pregnant, you're stressed? I have my own personal experience. I was scared of marriage, so even the old concepts of you being, you're working, you're doing domestic things at home, you're still going to get pregnant, you're still going to handle all the things the men expect of you. So those things were really big worries for me, and it took me a long while to decide to settle down. And getting married and the process of pregnancy, I developed what we call preeclampsia because I was really stressed, I was scared. And after having the baby, they came to a point where even seeing the baby was something, if you took the baby from me, I would be happy. Yeah, and I'll feel relieved. Because I was just the only one, nobody came. And one day I broke down, and my husband had to go and call my elder sister to come and stay with me. She stayed with me for 2 months. The second pregnancy was the same thing. They had to call my mom, who stayed with me, because I was just stressed. So what do we do? Because this thing is recurrent. It's not just, and I'm sure across other cultures and civilizations, you see women going through, not just the local women, working women too. So what do we do? At what point do we integrate solutions? Is it at the school level? Is it a policy level? Is it carrying these men that are not even, they are not seeing it and they're not helping you at home at times? They're sleeping. So what do we do? Really, that's just my question.
Good evening. My name is Nkolule Bosbanda. I'm one of the fellows. I'm sorry, my sister. It's happening to me right there. I think one of the challenges when we start speaking at a decolonial epistemic practice level is the idea versus the application. You've shared with us the indigenous system and the indigenous knowledge systems that work, and we know they work. My question to you is, the nursing system is a Western, is based on a Western approach within Southern Africa. It's approached from the West that uses Western medical and surgical approaches. But now you're talking about the indigenous approaches. When and where do we bring this together such that what you talk about becomes practical? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. I'm Voyo from South Africa. I'm also one of the fellows. My question also comes to you because I'm a mother. I wanted to ask, does the indigenous plants still have a role to play towards pregnancy? Because what I have observed these days, especially educated women, we give birth at a later stage, and then we go through a lot as compared to our indigenous people during their time, because for us, we know a lot, also we watch a lot. Does those plants have something that they can do to decrease the stresses? Because some stresses sometimes they develop through maybe work, because in the olden days, if you compare our pregnancies with the old people, they are not the same. Also, what I also pick it up, most of the mothers these days, I don't know if is it true stress they give birth through the C-section is not like the natural birth. So what can be the causes of that? Is it the mental health, or is it something naturally, or is it the government, they want to use the funds of the medical aid because they say true C-section is gonna be over 5 minutes, and then when it's a natural birth, you have to, it's gonna take too much. I wanted to ask, like, is there any difference? Thank you.
Thank you, Guyo. I think most questions came to you. I'll request that as we go through the next lot, we keep it succinct so that we're able to get as many questions from the room as well. And hopefully the next question will come to our other speakers as well. Please.
Thank you very much for all your questions. I think I'll attempt to the first Josephine's question on what currently is happening. With maternity, midwifery, or pregnancy, as Dr. Gulilego rightly said, we have a Western type of medicine that is happening, and we do not have an identity anymore. Also, especially as working mothers, I had somebody speak about working mothers, and those are some of the trajectories I'm trying to bring to the fore to say, pregnancy has always evolved. Women have always fallen pregnant, but what structural or what support did they have when they got pregnant? They had the support of the community that was around them, which took off most of the burden that they had. With patients who have preeclampsia, she had a first birth, and a second birth, which were more or less the same. And as we say as midwives, every pregnancy is different. When a woman gets pregnant the first time, she does not become an expert of pregnancy or of birth. Every time it is different. So it is important to give them support each and every time. Coming down to the traditional practices and how we can integrate them, we first need to acknowledge them. And unfortunately, we do not have, or we are falling short of our identity to a greater extent, especially as Africans. We have ceased to have an existence. Most of us, even if women come in and they have used herbs for their pregnancy, and even if things are going wrong, we tend to be judgmental instead of looking into what works and what does not work. And the suggestion is, we do have antenatal care, but as a midwife in a public hospital, you can see 80 women per day. And that does not give you any rapport to know a woman in depth, to understand them, which is contrary to a traditional birth attendant who knew this woman deeply, where she's coming from, what are her fears, and where she's going. So that model can also be adopted into conventional medicine through community midwifery, through midwives or doulas being put into the community to cater for certain type of women and to have at least 5 women within the community. We are not saying let's stop conventional medicine, but we are saying let's complement each other for the well-being of women and their mental status. I hope I have covered most of the questions. Going to Vuyo's question about cesarean birth and natural birth versus natural birth. The issue of litigation is not excluded, especially when it comes to medicine. Most doctors or practitioners are fearful of litigation. When a woman dies during childbirth, like I said earlier on, pregnancy is not considered as pathology or an illness. So when a woman dies during childbirth, it's really an issue. And most especially in the private sector, they cannot afford the issues or the litigation that comes with it. Hence, when we have a pregnant woman who has had a cesarean section the first time, there tends to be a repetition of that. Putting into consideration that there are so many adverse effects that happen when a woman has cesarean section, there are complications that can happen, bleedings can happen, and we lose many mothers due to that. All that anxiety is going to affect the mental state of women. Support systems, the men, definitely. That's why now we have respectful maternity care, which has been echoed by the World Health Organization. We are encouraging men or partners to be part of the journey of these women. so that we can reduce the burden and preserve the mental well-being of the patients. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'd like to open the second round of questions. Yeah? We got an arm up. Yeah. And second one, I think there's one right behind you.
Hi, my name is Bertha, and I'm a master's student at the School of Geography. My question is for Dr. Mustafa. And I have a question around commodity-led growth, mono-commodity-led growth. So what we thought would happen with specifically the EU phasing out carbon-intensive imports was we had speculated that that would spell an end to extractive industries on the continent. But it looks like we just have another wave of extraction with needing lithium, etc., for electric vehicles. It looks like that's just intensifying. And I think there seems to be a dishonesty around the fullness of those supply chains. So I guess my question is, with that second wave of extractivism, do you think that we genuinely still have an opportunity for domestic, local, industrial growth that is not driven by the patterns of consumption in the global north?
Hi, my name is Kenna. My question is also for Dr. Mustafa, and my question is around collaboration between African governments, because I think most of the time we do have manpower, but I think the bigger problem is collaboration between the different governments in Africa as a whole, or maybe even sub-Saharan Africa. And I wanted to know if you really looked into that, and what is the problem and how can we help in solving that problem. And also the other thing is with private companies that are doing all these extractions and all these businesses in Africa, most of the time they have collaboration between the different countries in Africa. What is the policies from those from the government about those private companies? Is there any regulation that is being done that is helpful for the African countries, or it's just them taking something outside Africa and most of African countries are really not benefiting? Thank you.
My name is Patrick, also a AfOx fellow. My question, rather comment, that reflection goes to Dr. Fenkadu on his conclusion and suggestion for an area-based approach in terms of for the management of the refugees, returnees, IDPs, all those people. So I generally agree with that approach, and because I'm also in the field of refugee protection, I think the challenge we have with our African governments, and displacement is a big thing in Africa, is prioritizing the refugee issue, the displacement issue, for and mainstreaming that in national budgets. So we have, for example, governments investing a lot in other sectors but ignoring the issue of refugees. And when they have to, they also have to say that for us to do this to refugees, then we also have to do this for our citizens. So I wonder whether you have any tips on what strategies we can use to convince our governments to really invest in solving the displacement challenge once and for all, because as you said, the Somali area protracted displacement and many other places, including Kenya, where I come from. So do you have any tips on how we can really convince governments to invest in this area, including everything else, including in the alternative maternity approaches and all that? So yeah, that's my comment.
Thank you for that. I will use some guided democracy given I'm the MC. Do you have any questions for Dr. Kosaga? Yeah. You have one here? I have one at the back as well, and that's the most, yeah, so. And then also if you have any questions for Dr. Fikando as well, please. I'll take two. Okay.
Good evening to Mayor Dr. American Saga. Firstly, thank you all of you guys for the talk. I'm Jeremy, I'm a master student here. I have a question in regard to the sort of not viability, but sort of the extent of collaborative research across the continent when it comes to sort of astrophysics and scientific affairs. Because I think oftentimes it feels like when you hear these major breakthroughs in the world and like, oh, we found this about dark matter or new discoveries across the galaxies, you rarely hear in our continent from our scientists, from our people, and this often gives a perception that maybe we're just not doing, or maybe the institutions aren't there. So I just wanted to ask, because there's some interesting slides at the end, particularly towards South Africa, what your perception is on the state of sort of scientific research in your field, and what you think can be done better in institutions, but also from the government to further this in future years. Thank you.
And one last one for Dr. Fikando before we allow him to respond. Your hand has been up, so the good thing is we're going to still have time for us to interact, so please don't feel that you'll be left out. We'll get to talk. Let's give the lady a chance.
All right, thank you. My name is Esther from South Africa, but I'm Malawian, and I was raised in Zambia. So I was raised in Zambia, so that was interesting in Mufulira actually. So the first question would be to Dr. Marie. I think I found that very impressive, but I won't pretend that I understood much of the maths. So my question really was maybe if you would explain what the impact of this dark matter, which I first heard about today, is like on our lived experiences. Does it have an impact on how we experience the world? I think that's just something of interest to me. And then the SA equipment you mentioned at the end, what are the practical implications in terms of not just advancement of knowledge, but how will it contribute, whatever the results are, to improving our lives? I don't know if that makes sense, like practically, the issues there, I couldn't really connect. Then on climate displacement, I found that to be very interesting, and I want to understand what is stopping recognition. I think you said it's not recognized as refugees due to that. Is it in the instruments, international human rights instruments, or what exactly? Because from your presentation, it was quite clear that it's a fact. So I'm trying to understand why it's a problem to actually recognize it as whether amongst those categories or whatever the case is there. Then lastly, on the Zambianization, what impact does it have on the state of mining in Zambia today, if you've looked that far?
Thank you for those, please. Who would like to start? Yep.
Thank you. For the first question, yeah, this is a good question because when I was doing my PhD, I hear a lot of questions that people ask me. Why are you looking at the sky when all the resources are on Earth or on Earth? So it's like, wow, you're doing something that people think it's not that useful when you come from a developing country, because astronomy is always seen as a like a domain for developed countries, Western countries. And so after I completed my PhD, I worked at the Office of Astronomy for Development because of this question, to see how with astronomy I can impact the socio-economical development challenges in my country and also in other developing countries. So astronomy, like, yes, developing astronomy in developing countries is not only developing astronomy, but also indirectly impacting the socio-economical development of the country. So the problem also is sometimes the government doesn't really believe on that because they want to see effects on the near future. You don't talk about all those things, the later future, something like this. And but if I take the example of my country, we had a project of building a telescope, a bigger optical telescope, but at the end it doesn't work because most of the projects rely on the government in place, and so it's not that sustainable. But now what we are doing, like I said, we have a magazine for French-speaking countries. There are also for English-speaking countries, in order to sensibilize, to do outreach, to show to people that astronomy can also be practiced in developing countries because the sky is for everyone. So you need to understand, because if there is something like a meteor coming to us or something, we need to have some people that are specialized on the field in order to help. So it's also something that can also be used on another way, like the case of South Africa, where astronomy also can be also used on different parts, like tourism, for example, that's called astrotourism. There are also physicians that data science, people that, the human development resources also coming with this field. And the second question about the impact of dark matter in our life. Like I said, dark matter we cannot observe it because maybe because without the instrument that we have it, but yes, astronomers are working in order to detect particle of dark matter, even though we don't have detect particle of dark matter, that we know that it exists because to explain the formation of the universe. So the thing is to better understand the universe. And also working on dark matter, we can discover other things that not related to dark matter. Because with the instrument, I talk about the SK, it's going to be the biggest radio telescope, where one of the part will be located in South Africa and the other part in Australia. And it's going to regroup like 200 antennas, and in order to have a more sensitivity and resolution, in order to look at distant objects that going back to where the universe was younger. And this will help us to better understand how everything have formed. Even we have galaxies, because we are in the Milky Way, our galaxy. So understanding how galaxies form will help us understanding how we have formed and other planets also. And also the human species, because we are living on the earth. So it's something that, yeah, we are working on, even though it's difficult, I can say, because sometimes they say, why working, studying something that you cannot see, but you know it's there. Like when you look at the glass, we put something in the water, you can see that it can be something like it deformed, right? But you know that there is water in the glass. But the deformation of the thing, you don't really see the water between the source, something that you put in, but you know that there is water that influences this. So it's almost look like dark matter, like you know it exists, it has influence, but it's something like transparent. this is why it's hard to detect. But yeah, we're working on it, and then maybe the luck will come on our side. We will detect it, and when we detect it, we don't. Maybe we're going to change the name and not call it dark matter, because we call it dark matter because when I don't really see know something a lot, we put dark, black or dark matter, dark energy. But in the future, maybe it will change. It will be maybe yes.
And we look forward to listening to this and some more in our next session. Really. So we have about 2 minutes. Apologies, it's slightly late, so I will beg your indulgence that we go over by at least a couple of minutes so that we allow our presenters to answer the questions before we wrap it up. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, David. Now, 2 questions. One is from Patrick. The question is, what do you advise our government is to do? I think the first speaker, I think I cut your name. She said context is important. So the response should be context-based. Even in Ethiopia, there are different contexts. The Somali region context is relatively where the refugees have been in that situation, some of them for over 30 years, others for 20 years. Refugees and the host communities belong to the same ethnicity, similar cultural and religious practice. The social cohesion is quite strong. The Somalis are very good entrepreneurial community. For instance, the job camp in Kenya during COVID, the job was probably second to Nairobi in terms of generating foreign currency for the government of Kenya. In Ethiopia, probably the same, but we don't have the data. So, and when Somalis say like, Isili is one of the biggest markets in Kenya, Bole Mikali, the biggest market, one of the biggest markets in El Salvador. So when they are supported, since Somalis are very good in entrepreneurial activity. So we don't need to keep them in campus. We don't need to say, so refugees are not a burden. They can work, they can help not only themselves, but the local community as well as the national government. So, but we need to act within context specific. With the climate displacement, yeah, the UN framework doesn't recognize the climate displacement as reason for refugee registration. That might, because that, UN, UNHCR, they all are resistant to this because it has also implication for resettlement in the Western world. But interestingly, even the national government in Africa, like in Ethiopia, they say, drought used to come once in 10 years, once in 8 years, but this time it comes probably once in 2 or 3 years. In few years back, climate displacement was temporary because rain fell 1 season or 2 seasons. Now it fell 5, 6 seasons, which means 3, 4 years. So it's not anymore temporary. But for the national government, probably they don't have the resource to keep them in campus, to give them support, so that they wanted to give a blind eye. You see, while even if they know that it's a serious problem.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that response.
Well, thank you very much. Briefly for such brilliant questions about the monocommodity, about escaping the monocommodity trap in Gambia and any countries with mineral resources. Especially currently, we have seen the new scramble for raw materials in favor of the green revolution, electrification, and the substitution of oil. It could be pessimistic and optimistic in one aspect, and the other aspect. The optimistic is in case they make another intensive extraction, the factor of endowments in Africa now changed. We used to be labor scarce, shortage of labor until 1960. Now we have a majority of young generation in Africa. Africa is a very young continent.
from which skills migration from mining sector could be easily migrated to other sectors and linkages could be built up in this one. So other secondary industry, supplementary industries could be easily established surrounding copper. And this migration after a while could create what called adaptation with crisis. Something like what happened in COVID. All the mineral countries collapsed in terms of their activities and and of course the consequences was very severe. But once you have industrial diversification, you could easily adapt with the crisis. For the second question about the African government and the collaboration for the industrialization, we had a very wonderful experience when Egyptian company called Al-Sawidi made some head of it. They manufacturing copper cables in Africa. And in 1997, they decided to establish a factory to fabricate copper in Kitwe. So I traveled to Kitwe and I visited the factory. And the story is, unfortunately, they couldn't have the technology like Glencore and other Canadian multinational companies, extractive copper, to and Chinese companies to exact the same copper parts to be ready to be fabricated. Otherwise, so that's why they change their activities to establish with Cisco. Cisco is responsible for electricity in Zambia, electrometers, and copper wires. But they didn't have the chance to compete internationally or expand as imagined. The last question about the status of Zambia economic. Zambia is a spectacularly unlucky country. This is the history, spectacularly unlucky. And this is not me, this is James Bergson, Expectations of Modernity, Miles Darmar, his recent introduction of the precarity of the mining communities. But we're still optimistic if we rely on the factor of endowments and the young generation and the ability to have skilled, cheap labor. In Africa, it could be easily diversified in terms of industrialization. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mustafa, for that. And I think with that, I'd like to wrap it up. Big thank you. As they take their seats, I think we give them a round of applause. Big thank you to our speakers for today. Big thank you to you for gracing us with your time. I think earlier on I made an error omission. I think we have our AfOx fellow collaborators in the room as well. I don't know if you can just wave from where you're seated, if you have them in the room. Let's appreciate our collaborators. Yeah, big thank you. And I wrap up a big thank you to the AfOx team, as well as our partner, Hello College, for hosting us. We still have our informal session. We have drinks. Please do stick around. If you have further questions for our speakers, we encourage you to reach out to them and get that discussion going. And with that, I think we wrap it up. See you at our next AfOx Insaka. Just to let you know, the drinks are on the right. On them.